Wade Norton wants to know, if my prop shaft seal is scratched where the seals go, is it possible to spin the shaft on a lathe and use some fine grit sandpaper or emery cloth to smooth it down some? How tight are the tolerances between the seals and the shaft? Are you able to get oversized seals, or would taking a couple of thousands off make any difference? This is a super common problem, more than people might think, that scratching your prop shaft and trying to get that to reseal. So thank you, Wade, and we're going to talk about this right now. Before that, our show sponsor, we do want to thank partsview.com for bringing you this content, allowing us to answer these questions for you guys and try and provide some value to you. You can check them out and save up to $50 right now using the coupon and the links in the description below. But on to our question. The prop shaft being scratched is a pretty serious deal. Now, let's start off with the tolerances. I don't know if there really is a tolerance as far as between your shaft and the seal. Most of the seals, what you're going to see is you're going to have a seal, and on the inside it is going to be a piece of rubber with a spring around it that collapses that lip, that rubber around the prop shaft, and that is what seals it. There's usually two. The inside is going to be more of like a pressure seal, and the outside is going to be more of, there's just two seals there for that to keep water out and keep oil in. I don't know exactly, if one's more of a pressure or one's like a, what you would really call them, but the tolerances are going to be, they're pretty tight. I think the bigger problem is that whenever you put something like that onto, like if you did it on a lathe, it should be symmetrical. If you were to try and do it by hand or something like that and then, scratch that out, now all of a sudden you have a flat spot on your prop shaft. A flat spot is not going to seal because the sealing is done because of how symmetrical the prop shaft is. You've got a polished surface that is perfectly round inside of a seal that is rubber with a spring around it. And that thing, the prop shaft is spinning at a very, very high rate. If you've got a flat spot on there or you got a scratch, it's going to let pressure out, water in the gear case, lube out. So the tolerances are pretty tight, but I would imagine, or I would think, in my opinion, is that it's the symmetrical or the roundness of the prop shaft. If you have a bent prop shaft, or if there's a flat spot on the prop shaft, or it's out of round, that's what's going to cause a leak before the diameter, I guess you would say, of it. If you take a few thousandths off, it's probably not going to make much of a difference. But on top of that, there are a few things that you can do to try and fix this. A lot of times you'll get scratches or pitting on a prop shaft because of a leader that got wrapped around the prop, fishing line that got wrapped around the prop. Anything like that gets wrapped around that prop shaft, it gets behind the propeller, it gets onto the shaft, and it gets bedded onto that O-ring, and then you spin that thing at, say, 3,000 RPM or 2,500, whatever, based on your gear ratio, that will wear into the prop shaft. It'll basically wear into the prop shaft, creating an issue where it won't seal. So there's a couple of different tricks that you can do. Probably the most common one is just to put an O-ring in there. So when you put your seals in, you're going to put your first seal in there, and also depending on where the scratch is, but you put your first seal in there, and then you take an O-ring that fits decently tight on your prop shaft. You stick the O-ring in there, and then you put the next seal on top of that, and that O-ring kind of sits in between those two seals, and that works a lot of times, more often than you would think. I'm sure somebody out there that is an engineer is talking about, rubber on rubber and this, that, and the other thing, but it does work. I mean, it works. You can put an O-ring on there, put that in between the two seals, and it'll work for how long will it work? And it's anybody's guess. But as far as, getting it to seal, that works. And then we've also seen, depending on your gear case, the ability to put 3 of those seals on there. So if you just have 2, sometimes you have enough space to where you can put a third seal on there, as long as it doesn't, mess with the prop shaft and your hub and all that other, not the prop shaft, but your prop and your thrust washer and all that. As long as that's not smashed on there, we've seen that work as well. But there are limited gear cases that you have that ability of doing and putting a third seal on there. So just a couple of different things that you can do to try and hopefully seal that gear case and, not have to buy a new prop shaft or a new gear case. But I'd try the O-ring trick first. Your tolerances, not a big deal. Oversized seals, I don't think they really make any oversized seals for a prop shaft. Let's see what else we got going on here. Mr. Roger says, this series is a hit, bud, talking about the Boston Whaler series. I appreciate that. I hope you guys are following along. Phenomenal build, 220 Boston Whaler. I would say you'll be gaining subs big time like this. Well, I mean, we can sure hope so. Thank you for, putting that out there, Roger, and anybody that isn't subscribed to the Boaters podcast as well, make sure you hit that subscribe button. Says, good work, man. Just wondering, is the marina/shop hiring you to do this, or is this a boat you personally bought to flip? So this is more of a question on like how we do our boats and what we do our boats. So most of them are personal boats. So I generally just do restorations now. It's pretty much, I try and buy a boat and restore it, use it, and then get another boat while I'm using that boat. And then as soon as I finish the next one, then I'll sell the one that I'm on. So kind of a flip, but usually it's just a matter of what's available and needing another boat to do and just wanting to do them. The Boston Whaler is not one that I bought. That one was for the shop there. And that was more of like a partner deal on that one. And I just wanted to do that build. I mean, it was a boat that I saw sitting at that marina. I started in that marina in 2012, and that boat was sitting there on the rack then, and it never moved. I mean, the boat has 104 hours on it. It just sat there all the time. And it just, you can see the boat. It's in terrible shape. But yeah, I really wanted to do that boat. One of those boats that's like, that's a really, really nice boat. Whoever ends up buying that boat is going to have a ridiculously nice boat. That 220 is, if you're in the Keys or in South Florida, it is a reef. It is a sandbar. It is a Gulf. It is in the Everglades, backcountry. It's like all that in one boat. It's just perfect for those situations. It's not really an offshore boat, even though you wouldn't have any trouble on a good day going out to the hump or something like that. There's no problem there, but that boat it's a nice boat. Alec Fulgraf says, is it worth rebuilding a 2012 Yamaha F-150 very low hours? It's been submerged twice. This hurricane season has been rough. Alec, I'm sorry to hear it. That is unfortunate, but yeah, as far as rebuilding it, it totally depends on what you're talking about with the rebuild. Being a 2012, it's 12 years old, but a Yamaha F-150 holds its value, especially if it has low hours. The issue with a submerged engine is that there's a lot of compromises that you make, because now your computer, your electronic harness, your electrical system, your harnesses, your relays, your injectors, like everything has been underwater now. So if you're talking salt water, that's an issue. It's a problem that comes into the reliability factor of the engine, because at any point in time, seeing that this electrical component was underwater and is now probably corroding, then you're looking at potential problems down the road that just out of the random, it's going to have this issue that you're going to be like, why is it doing that? And you're going to have to track down what electrical issue that you're dealing with outside of the mechanical stuff. If it's just submerged, generally, as long as you pickled it as soon as you came out of the water, which on that situation there, in and of itself, everybody needs to realize immediately. I know a lot of people are like, oh, I pickled this engine or something. You've got this outboard or this engine, this boat that goes underwater, and you pull it out, and people say, oh, that I pickled it. Did you really pickle it? So in order to pickle an engine or a boat or any of that stuff, as soon as it comes out of the water, you can't pull the boat or the engine out of the water, let it sit overnight or sit for 2-3 days and then go and put oil in it and all this other stuff. That's not pickling. As soon as the boat comes out of the water, you need to get on that engine and you need to get all the water out of it, and then you need to get new oil in it. As soon as you get new oil in it, you need to get all the old fuel, or if there's water that got in the fuel system, all that needs to come out of the boat, out of the engine, new oil in it. You need to start it and run it after you've got all the water out of it, and then let it run for, say, a minute or two, drain all the oil, and then refill all the oil again to get all the water out of it. And then you need to just let that thing run. You need to heat it up. And when it heats up, it's going to burn off any water. It's going to burn off, heat up all your electrical components and get all the water that got on them out of it. And then you're going to want to change the oil again to get all of the water out of all the little passages that are in there, and to make sure that there's oil on all the metal. You're going to want to spray it down with corrosion blocker or corrosion X or anything at this point in time, fogging oil or a dry silicone or pretty much anything. You need to get the metal protected because it was all soaked with salt water. So that's really what pickling is. If you just drain the water, put oil in it, and start it for 2 seconds, turn it over, that's not really pickling the engine, and that engine is most likely going to have problems later on because you never got all the water out of it, and you never, got oil on all of the metal parts on the inside, all of the piston rings, all the valves, all the exhaust, got all the water out, burned all the water out of the exhaust and the intake and all. I mean, like, there's just so much that needs to be done immediately. Otherwise, you're going to have all kinds of problems. So if you pickled the engine as soon as it came out of the water, then yeah, I would say rebuilding that thing is totally worth it. If you pulled it out of the water, it's been sitting for a week or two, then depending on what that looks like, is it worth rebuilding? I would say yes, as long as it doesn't cost you more than, say, $4,000. Because once you get up to $4,000 or $5,000 for a 12-year-old Yamaha, I would say that's probably what they're worth, anywhere from 4 to say 7, depending on the hours. So if you get up into it's going to cost you $5,000 to fix this engine, then I would say then it wouldn't be worth doing. But my guess right out the gate is that yeah, I'd be rebuilding that 150. It's a hot commodity. Everybody wants them. They live forever. So yeah, I would definitely say yes. R777B says, where do you research and buy replacement hinges? Sounds like a tricky to match. Oh man, it is a pain. That comes with boating in general. It doesn't really have to be like a hinge or anything. I mean, it's for the most part anything on a boat. You think about a boat that was built 20, 25, 30 years ago, you're talking about hinges, you're talking about, latches, you're talking about hinge, compartment stoppers or windshields or seats or hatch compartments, like, access plates, stuff like that. A lot of that stuff is no longer made. So now all of a sudden you're on this research endeavor trying to fit something in the existing hole. You got to fabricate stuff, and it can become a tricky business. Pretty much where I do most of my research is from suppliers. So like, obviously Google. So you start with Google, just Googling it, seeing who's got what out there. But I'm looking at Amazon, Land & Sea, Port Supply, Donovan, anywhere really. And then if I can't find it there, like let's say that the place, it's not made anymore, you want to start with whatever item you have and try and figure out a brand on what brand it is and try and get an exact replacement. That makes your life the easiest. But if you can't find an exact replacement, then you're looking at Marine Connection, Great Lakes Skipper, eBay, anywhere, online, some of these secondhand stores that have these old used boat parts, Lake Lanier, places that have junk boats or replacement boats parts. That's where you're going to find stuff like that. It's going to be on the secondhand market, not necessarily just like, ordering brand new, because that becomes the tricky part where they don't make the stuff anymore, and it becomes a pain because the new stuff never fits what the old stuff was, and you just got to fabricate stuff, which is no fun for anybody. Hey, I'm Andrew. Hello, Andrew. Why on earth would you have the nav and the anchor lights on the same switch? Well, this is kind of an interesting question, Andrew, because 75-80% of the boats out there have the navigation and the anchor lights on the same switch. I guess maybe I'm not reading it properly, or maybe you're thinking there's one switch that is turning on the anchor and the nav at the same time, and you don't have the ability to turn on the anchor. But that's the only thing that I can think of there, because that's 80% of the boats have the navigation and the anchor on the same switch. It's just a double-sided switch where, I don't know what they call it, a double throw something or other, and go up, on the navigation side, it has your navigation and your anchor lights, because you have to run your anchor light with your navigation lights. You can't just run your nav lights. So anytime that your navigation lights come on, your anchor light should come on with them. But when you're at anchor, you don't want your navigation lights on because you're sitting still. So you have one side of the switch does navigation with the anchor light, and then the other side of the switch just turns on the anchor light and not your navigation lights. So maybe there's just a miscommunication there of what exactly is going on, but that's the only thing I could think of, because a lot of boats don't want to have just a second switch. So you got two switches now that do the same thing basically, when you would just have one switch that is double-sided. So Belay Dat says, what are you spraying on the life cock to get it off after assembly is complete? So sealants, I mean, soapy water, bro. Any soapy water. In this case situation here, we found some Dove body wash was there at the shop, so I took a Tilex Clorox bleach bottle, just a sprayer, took the label off of it and cleaned it out, put the body wash in there, put water in there, shook it up, and just make some soapy water, whatever you got. I mean, I wouldn't get any gritty soap, but like just, some soapy water is all I was using there. That's pretty much the go-to for sealant and stuff like that. Jeff Platts wants to know, is there a way to clean up the inspection port covers on the deck? I have a 1996 Outrage 240 and the covers are a little beat up. Hard to find new ones, so interested if you're going to replace yours on the Dauntless or clean up. So we cleaned them up, same thing. Back to the whole discussion of finding old used parts that can be a pain because they don't make that stuff anymore. And even worse is that finding the O-rings to go to those inspection plates, but you can make your own O-rings. That's, something that you can do. You can just buy, the O-ring thing and then just cut it out, or they call it cord. I think they call it O-ring cord. Maybe you just buy 5 feet of O-ring cord as long as your width is correct or your diameter. A lot of them are 4 millimeter, 4.5 millimeter, 5.5 millimeter, depending on your inspection plate. You just buy that cord from Amazon, cut it to length, and then you can glue them with some super glue together, put that thing on there, and boom, there's a new O-ring. But as far as the covers, a lot of those Boston Whalers riveted those inspection plates down as well, which could be a whole new pain because it's riveted. It's not just take screws out, put a new one in there and screw it down. And then also you've got molded gel coat around it, which means it's like got to be the same size. So for me on those, I wet sanded them. So it depends on the material of the cover. What's the non-skid like on it? What's the texture like on it? What's the color? But a lot of times just good old-fashioned bleach. So most of them are white. You can do a little bit of a wet sand, put bleach on them, which is going to bleach them back to white, and you kind of clean them up like that. Put some kind of a protectant on there, and that's all I did with there was kind of cleaned them up. Bleach is your friend in some situations. Other situations it's not. Remember, if you use bleach, it's going to be stripping any other protectant that you have on there. Like if you've got your, everything's waxed and clean on the boat, since you put your bleach on there, it's going to strip all that off. But it's going to restore the white back to those hatch covers, and that's what we did was 1000 grit wet sandpaper, bleached them. David D, does someone assign a boat for you to work on, or do you pick the boat to work on? I pick them. So like I said, I pretty much only do restorations now. So usually it is a boat that I want to do, or a lot of times also I'll do some random stuff for family, friend, that kind of thing of, trying to help someone out here and there. But for the most part, it is all basically only going to be, I pick the boat and based on what needs to be done and also the content that could be made. That's pretty much what I'm trying to do is only do the restorations. So I'm picking the boats. Mr. David. Roger Reed, another Roger, says, since it rains daily at 3, I wonder why nobody covers their boats or even any attempt to keep sun and weather off. All plastic, paint, and rubber get UV damage over time. Even a basic tarp for $30 to $50 every year works, but being lazy or doing nothing sure does ruin things. I use my boat, but also cover it when sitting, or it makes its home in my shop. Even a basic boat cover pays for itself with preventable damage, just saying. I agree with you, Roger. Maintenance is key on pretty much everything on a boat. Location's also going to play a major factor in there. So like if you're near the ocean, if you're like close to the ocean, if you're in the Keys, if you're in something like that, a lot of times you've got to deal with a wind factor. So if you just go out and buy a $30, $50 tarp, that's not going to make it a year. And one good gust of wind within a month or two, you get random wind gusts and storms and stuff that pop up. The wind will rip that tarp up, and now all of a sudden, you got your loops and stuff like that, the metal. If that tarp's sitting there flapping around, scratching your gel coat, it's a different situation. So A lot of people down there, because in a storage facility like that, a lot of people are not there for, say, 6-7 months out of the year, or even 8 months, 9 months out of the year. And so if you just put a cheap tarp like that on there and then you try and leave it for 8 months, and one good storm rips that tarp up, and you come and now all of a sudden that tarp has spent 6 months, 5 months, flapping up and down with the metal scratching your boat, I mean, you got a whole nother problem. So that's kind of like why a lot of other, why you don't see so many, because also some of the cheap covers, like you said, it only lasts a year before it's all ripped up. But, a good cover is going to be like $5,000, if not more, to have a custom cover made. So that's kind of one factor. Other than that, yeah, I mean, if you don't have to worry about the wind factor and you can actually, get your boat covered, 100%, it's going to save you a ton. It's going to make the boat last a lot longer. It's going to make it keep it looking really good for a lot longer. You won't have to be doing wet sanding and oxidizing. It's all maintenance. Everything on a boat is maintenance. If you don't do maintenance, then it's just going to fall apart. Same thing with your car, your house, or everything you own. Big Daddy Fishing says, "Hi, bro." Hello, Big Daddy. I want to move up my twin Yamaha engines. Is it okay if there is a gap between the motor and top of transom? So if I'm understanding you correctly, and I'm trying to think about what you're saying here. So your outboard isn't necessarily sitting on your transom. It's not like your outboard just hangs on the back of the transom and that sitting on the transom is what's holding it on there. The outboard is bolted to your transom. So, whenever you hook it there, yeah, there can be a gap on the top of it. If you're talking about like where the bracket is, the bracket comes up, it has like little like tips that stick out over the top of it. If you're talking about that space in between the top of the transom and where that bracket sits like this, if you're talking about that space, yeah, 100%. All day you can have as much space there as you need. Obviously, if you're talking about other issues like variables such as a soft transom, an overpowered boat, stuff like that, jack plates, if you're talking about things like that, that plays a factor in it. But generally, outside of those, you get the engine height for the water coming off of the boat to the lower unit, so that way it's correctly mounted, and you bolt it to the transom. If there's a space there, it's not going to change anything. Now, if you've got a soft transom and you're trying to put, overpower it, and or just a soft transom in general, and let's say you're repowering, you got a soft transom with a 25-inch shaft engine, and you're going to put a 30-inch shaft on there because that's what you found, and you mount it all the way up. It's got an extra 50 horsepower on it. Whenever you think about leverage. So you put your boat into forward gear. If this is the transom, this is the outboard, right? And the higher you go, the more leverage you're putting on the transom. If you've overpowered it and the transom's soft, the lower unit is going to push like this. So that's pushing the outboard like that. That's pulling on the top. So the higher up you go, the more pulling you're going to have on the top, which can rip the transom off. Again, this is hypothetical variables of a soft transom, too high of an engine, and, ripping the transom off. But that's the only thing that I can really think about. I mean, there's not really, it's bolted on the boat. It's not like you are, resting the engine on the top of the transom. So no, I don't think that there's any problem with having a gap there. Now, a gap between the mounting bracket and the transom, that's a different story, and yeah, that's a problem. But if you're talking about from the top to the bracket, no. 1957 Cajun says, "What were you using on all of your hose fittings, sealant or Teflon?" So, I mean, I'm just using sealant. We're talking about plumbing fittings like washdown pumps, stuff like that, and you got the nipple for the hose, and the hose goes on the nipple, and I don't think the sealant really does anything, but I use sealant mainly because a lot of them, they're kind of hard to put on there. So you wipe sealant on there, push them on there, boom, they slide right on, makes it really easy to do. So I don't think it really does anything as far as like sealing it. Maybe it does. I don't know. I mean, I'm not the hose clamp tightening it down and it being such a tight fit. That's really what seals it, not necessarily the sealant, but more of just making your life easy. Robert Fernandez says, "I have a 1986 H2 Yachts, what is known for now as a Pursuit. It's a 22-footer. The structure and the fiberglass is in great condition, although I'm getting some type of mold coming out of the fiberglass. I would like to know how I can stop that. I clean it with Clorox, it comes off, but then in a couple of weeks it comes back. So that's a great question. Okay, right out the gate, I don't really have an answer for you. I mean, I've seen this before. I don't really know what it is. A lot of times it's the coring is rotting, and that's what's, whatever. I mean, if you got coring, you've got rotting wood, you've got some kind of foam, you got something inside there, a varnish or something like that, and it's leaking out in a specific location. That's usually what happens there. I've seen this, outside of digging all that out and reglassing it, there's not really a fix for it, because no matter what you do, it's always going to be leaking out of there. If I'm, from what I've seen, if you use Clorox on it, comes right off. But also something that you can do in situations like this, like, say you've got your console and anytime water gets on it, there's like a leak that comes out that's got stain that comes out. I know what you're talking about, but kind of hard to really see. It's not really mold, I don't think. But what I would do is make sure that the gel coat around it is completely protected. Like, wet sand it, compound it, polish it, and put wax on there. Once you put wax on there, a lot of times that stuff, when it comes out, it doesn't stain. So you don't have to wipe it off with Clorox or anything like that, because when you wipe it off with Clorox, now all of a sudden you've wiped any kind of protectant out of the gel coat. So when it comes back, the gel coat is going to absorb it again, and it's going to be worse. It's just going to continue happening. But if you put protectant on there like a wax, a lot of times that wax will allow you to be able to wipe it off a lot easier. You just take a wetted soapy rag and wipe it off without having to get out Clorox bleach and put elbow grease in it. Don't really have a true answer on how to fix it outside of digging it out. And Troy Davison says, how come you did not mount the fuel water separator in the bilge higher in the bilge, so that way you could get a jar or container under the petcock to drain water if it ever happens? No reason, Troy. There is absolutely no reason why I didn't. In situations like that, it's good that everything's on video and that it's always put out there. I mean, I got no problem with that. Not perfect. Don't claim to be. I make mistakes, and some things I'd rather get done than make them perfect. So on this situation, no reason, just being upside down for 4 hours and working in a hole that's like this big around a rigging tube, one-handed with a drill, trying to hold things back, and then get your arm like this with your elbow in the fiberglass. Other than that, being upside down trying to drill something, that's kind of the only reason why stuff like that happens. But I mean, I think it's cool because you get to see these kind of comments and you think about this kind of stuff, and it helps me to try and, not do stuff like this. But you're thinking about your perspective of you're on a camera inside the bilge up against the wall, being able to see everything right there, whereas in reality, there's only this much that you're working in trying to mount it. So there's totally no reason why I didn't mount it higher. Just 4 hours of blood pooling in your head, and you're just thinking, oh, I gotta get this thing here, will it fit? Yeah, I'll come off. Like, that's all there is. No other reason besides that. Boats and Bows Outdoors says, I'm putting a new fuel tank in my 1984 Robalo 2320. It has a fully sealed box where the tank sits. The old one was sitting in a lot of water. How do I go about adding drain holes? Adding drain holes, the hull is completely filled with foam. So really you only need have one drain on that, but you just got to drill it. So for one, you don't want water getting into the compartment. So when you put it all back together, it needs to be completely sealed, breathable, but sealed. Like, you don't want water to come in from the deck and get into that compartment, but you also need it to be, breathable, where it can get up to the sides of the gunnels and stuff like that. But you can't allow water in there. Having a drain in there is a good idea. It depends on the boat situation, the bulkhead. I don't know the 2320 1984 Robalo. Do you have a live well in the deck or not? But I would say that you just got to drill it, and down in the bottom, you need to drill through whatever it is. With the foam, you just drill through the foam, put a tube in there. As long as you don't have anything on the other side of the bulkhead where the back, here's your fuel tank compartment, here's the back bulkhead, and as long as there's nothing on the back side of this, down in that bottom corner, you just drill the hole there and make it through. Now, I would put a deck drain of a drain plug on the other side of that, because you want to be able to pull the plug, see if there's any water in there, let it drain if there is, and address the issue of water getting in there and fix that. But you don't want it to just be a straight drain, because if it's a straight drain, now all of a sudden water from your bilge is going to be able to make its way into your fuel tank compartment, causing you a whole nother problem that you're never going to be able to fix. It's just always going to have water in there. So you want to make sure that that isn't, happening. But being able to drain it if there is water, yeah, I'd put a drain plug on there. You just got to drill it. Now, if you have a live well, like here's your fuel tank compartment, here's the back bulkhead, and in between that back bulkhead and this other bulkhead is a live well in between there, that's a whole different situation. That's, how deep does that sit? You're just going to have to take measurements. And like, this is the part of the job where you got to figure it out. This is all fabrication and creativeness is where this comes into. Here's your problem and you got to fix it, and you got to do whatever you got to do to fix it. So, for one, make sure there's no water getting in there, but you're the only person that's going to be able to figure out, how exactly to make that to where you can inspect the fuel tank, keep the fuel tank breathable, but yet be able to drain it if you ever get water in there. And Mark Magi, you're going to get the last question. Did you have to pull the fuel tank and clean it out because the old fuel sat in there for so many years? Talking about the Boston Whaler. No. On boats like that, bigger boats like that, you can't just pull the fuel. You can't pull a 100-gallon fuel tank out of the boat to clean it. So, that we don't do that on those kinds of boats. But depending on the contamination of the fuel is what determines what exactly you have to do. For that boat, it was non-ethanol fuel in there. It was not, I didn't have a contaminated fuel tank where the fuel tank was bad, have a hole in it, have ethanol fuel, have water, none of that. I didn't have to deal with none of that. So I didn't have to pull any of that stuff or do any of that. Normally, if the fuel's just bad, you just put a pump on there, suck all the fuel out, and then add new fuel on top of that, and boom, there you go. You want to get as much out as possible. And then you can check your fuel water separator after, say, a tank of fuel, just to make sure any contaminants that were in there, any debris or whatever, gets put into that. Now, on another situation, like let's say you've got an aluminum fuel tank and somebody put ethanol fuel in the boat and then it sat for, say, 3 years, 4 years. You might have a completely different problem, because ethanol and old fuel, whenever you let ethanol set, it's going to absorb water. So as soon as it absorbs that water, the water separates from the fuel, and it even separates from the ethanol, I think, where you've got, gasoline, ethanol, and water, and the water is now going to be very corrosive, and that corrosive water is going to be sitting in the bottom tank, eating holes in the aluminum tank. So you might be looking at a fuel tank replacement. But if you've just got bad old ethanol fuel that's, say, in a plastic tank that's not going to be eating holes in it, but it's, say, a year old, 2 years old, you can pump that out. And then you can there are different companies that will polish your tank. So they come in, they take the fuel sender out, they take, sometimes they take the pickup. Different companies do different things, and they will hook it up to a machine that will pump a polish into the tank, and then it will pull it out of the tank. So they just sit there and it polishes the inside tank by running it through this cycle that they do. They can also polish your fuel too, where they pull the fuel out and they run it through the cycle and suck out any contaminants or stuff like that. So there are companies that can polish the tank and clean it doing that method. But yeah, those are the kind of the two big things as far as bad fuel tank and old fuel. Depending on how bad it is, you might need a new tank, but no, you don't pull the tank out of the boat just to clean the old fuel out.